The day the judge slammed that gavel and gave me 15 years for armed robbery, I wasn't looking at the judge. I was looking at my older brother Marcus sitting in the third row with his hands folded and his head tilted down playing the grieving family member. The whole room believed that look. My mother was crying behind him. Our cousins were shaking their heads at me. And there I was in an orange jumpsuit getting handcuffed in front of everyone who ever knew my name. My name is Darnell. I was 24 years old the day that judge sentenced me. I had a steady job, a one-bedroom apartment, and zero criminal history. None of that mattered once the evidence pointed at me. And the reason my fingerprints were on that gun, the reason this whole thing happened at all, was because of the one person in that courtroom who already knew what had gone down that night. The man performing grief in the third row, my brother Marcus. He had been planning this from the moment he made that phone call to me, and what he did took 8 years to undo. Marcus was 31 when he took that witness stand. Older, more confident, and better dressed than me, always had been. He had a wife, a house, and a neighborhood reputation as someone who had figured life out. So when he sat in that chair and looked at the jury with tired, heartbroken eyes and said I must have got mixed up with the wrong crowd, every person in that courtroom heard a good man struggling to accept his younger brother's failures. He said he didn't know I had gone down that road. He said he had tried to reach out, but I kept pulling away from the family. He said it quietly, like it caused him pain. The prosecutor barely pushed because Marcus gave them everything they needed without prompting. Not dramatic, just broken. A loving brother who couldn't save me from myself. And sitting at that defense table listening to him perform, what nearly destroyed me wasn't the incoming sentence. It was knowing every word leaving his mouth was a deliberate lie, because the robbery he described was his crime, every detail. His plan, his gun, his duffel bag, not mine. The night of the robbery replayed in my head every single day for 8 years. It started with a phone call at 11:22 p.m. Marcus said his car broke down near a convenience store on Hollies Avenue and needed a ride. I grabbed my keys without thinking. He was my brother. When I pulled up, the lot was empty. I waited about 90 seconds before Marcus came running from the side of the building, yanked open the back door, and jumped in breathing hard, dark hoodie pulled low, black duffel bag clutched tight against his chest. I asked what was happening. He said drive and we'd talk later. I drove. 2 minutes later, sirens lit up behind us. We were pulled over 4 blocks away. Marcus shoved the bag under the seat before officers reached the window. By the time police searched the car, the gun used in the robbery was wedged between my seat and the center console, right where my hand naturally rested. My prints were already on it because I had handled that same gun at Marcus's house 2 weeks earlier when he showed it to me. He had known exactly what he was setting up from the very beginning. 3 years into my sentence at Hargrove Correctional, I met a man named Roy on a work detail. Roy had done time for fraud and spent his free hours reading legal documents. One afternoon in the yard, he asked me to walk him through my case. When I got to the surveillance footage, Roy stopped me. He asked why not a single frame clearly showed the robber's face. I repeated the prosecution's argument, bad angle, hoodie up the whole time. Roy looked at me. He said convenience stores in that era almost always had multiple camera angles, and a person inside for 4 minutes appearing in zero clear footage didn't hold up. He told me to request the original footage logs, not just the clips used at trial, but complete unedited recordings from every camera. I had sat in that prison for 3 years without knowing I could even ask for that. Roy handed me a legal aid pamphlet the next morning. I read every word before lights out. For the first time since my sentencing, I had something that felt like a real direction, and I was not going to let it go to waste. I filed my first formal evidence request through the prison legal aid program 6 weeks after talking to Roy. I asked for the full unedited surveillance recording from the Hollies Avenue store, not prosecution clips but complete original footage from every camera. The response came back 43 days later. The original recording had been lost during a routine evidence storage transfer. One line, a case number, nothing else. I was about to fold the letter and walk away when a legal aid volunteer named Sandra stopped me and asked what I had received. She read it and frowned. Then she lowered her voice and told me something she probably shouldn't share. A clerk she had spoken to during a different case had mentioned the Hollies Avenue footage specifically. According to that clerk, the recording submitted to court was shorter than what had originally been collected at the scene. 6 minutes shorter. No official explanation had ever been filed for the missing time. Sandra said she wanted to connect me with a group that handled exactly this kind of situation. She said if those 6 minutes existed somewhere, she knew people with the resources and experience to find them. Sandra connected me with a wrongful conviction group called Second Sight. Their investigator, a retired cop named Gerald, tracked down a man named Earl Hutchins, a janitor who had worked at the Hollies Avenue store for 11 years. Earl had been on duty the night of the robbery and remembered the police response clearly. Earl told Gerald something that had sat in his memory undisturbed for years. He said he watched police collect evidence that night and saw, clearly and without any coaching, one officer place 2 flash drives into an evidence bag. Not one, two. He knew because he had been mopping near the register with a direct line of sight to the front counter where the store manager was handing items over. The police report listed only 1 flash drive, which meant the second had either been removed before logging or hidden under a different label. Either way, it was missing. And if it existed, it contained footage from the night of the robbery, footage that had never been submitted to court and that nobody connected to my conviction apparently wanted anyone to find. Sandra connected me with a volunteer attorney named Mr. Castillo, who had handled 3 prior wrongful conviction appeals through Second Sight. Based on Earl's statement and the evidence log discrepancy, Mr. Castillo filed a formal motion requesting a complete review of the physical evidence in my case. He cited the missing flash drive, the unaccounted footage minutes, and irregular chain of custody documentation. He told me directly it was a long shot, but it was a real one. The hearing was set 8 weeks out. I tried not to get ahead of myself. I had filed complaints from Hargrove before that went nowhere. But something shifted the moment that motion was filed publicly. Because 6 days before the hearing, I was called to visitation on a Tuesday afternoon expecting Sandra or Mr. Castillo. Instead, I sat down across the glass partition and found myself looking at my brother Marcus for the first time in almost 4 years. He was sitting there with a small, easy smile on his face, not nervous, not cautious, just relaxed, like a man who had stopped by to check in on someone he had no reason to worry about. Marcus looked clean and comfortable, button-down shirt, fresh haircut like he had come from work. He picked up the phone and waited for me to do the same. He opened with small talk, asked how I was holding up, said Mom had been worried. Then he shifted. He said he had heard I was pushing on the old case with a lawyer. He understood why, but sometimes the right move was accepting the situation and pursuing early release the correct way. He said it all calmly, like a man offering genuine advice. Then he leaned forward until his forehead was almost against the glass and dropped his voice to just above a whisper. He said, "You should just let this go." He held eye contact long enough to make sure it landed. Then came 4 more words, slow and deliberate. "Some things are buried for a reason." He set the phone down and walked out. I sat holding my side of the receiver long after he was gone. And right then I made a decision, quiet, firm, and permanent. I was not going to let it go, not even a little bit. Weeks after Marcus's visit, Mr. Castillo told me a woman named Beverly Cole had reached out to Second Sight on her own. Beverly had worked as a cashier at the Hollies Avenue store and was on shift 2 nights before the robbery. Police questioned her once after my arrest and never contacted her again. She said the conviction had never made sense to her, and when she heard someone was challenging it, she came forward. Beverly's key statement was about Detective Bryce Calloway, who handled my case. She said Calloway had returned to the store twice after the initial investigation, asking questions unrelated to the robbery about the neighborhood, nearby businesses, who knew who. It felt less like follow-up police work and more like personal information gathering. She had no proof, but it had sat wrong with her ever since. Mr. Castillo began looking into Calloway that same week. What came back connected 2 dots I had never thought to link, and completely changed my understanding of why I had been convicted, and why the conviction had remained unchallenged for years without a single person inside the system raising a question. Detective Bryce Calloway had retired quietly 14 months after my trial, no ceremony, no public statement. Mr. Castillo pulled business filings and found that 11 months after that retirement, Calloway had become a listed investor in a new construction company. The company was called Meridian Build Group LLC. The primary owner and operator was my brother Marcus. They had gone into business together, the detective who ran my case and the man who framed me less than a year after I started serving my sentence. Mr. Castillo was careful. He said we couldn't yet prove the business relationship was payment for suppressing evidence. Making that accusation without hard backing could damage everything we were building. But the connection was real, documented, and sitting in public filings anyone could access. I thought about Marcus at that visitation glass telling me some things were buried for a reason. I understood then that the burial had been a transaction. My freedom had been the price. Calloway had accepted the payment, and for 3 years they had been running a construction company together on the foundation of what that arrangement had bought them. Mr. Castillo advised me to stop pushing openly. If Marcus and Calloway sensed the investigation gaining heat, they would cover tracks aggressively. He wanted me to write Marcus a letter that sounded like I had given up, not dramatic, just quiet and tired. A man who had accepted his situation and was focused on staying out of trouble and counting down the days. I wrote the letter Wednesday evening. 3 drafts before the tone felt right, broken enough to be believable, plain enough not to sound scripted. I told Marcus I had dropped the legal proceedings, that the lawyer cost more energy than it was worth. I sent it through regular mail so there was no legal flag. Then I waited. 26 days later an envelope arrived in Marcus's handwriting. I handed it to Sandra to photograph before I opened it, then I sat down and read it carefully. The first page was warm and casual. The second was mostly unremarkable. Then I reached the bottom of page 2 and found a paragraph I had to read twice, slowly, to confirm I was understanding exactly what my brother had just put in writing and mailed to a prison. The letter was friendly and casual, the tone Marcus used when he felt in control. He said he was glad I had come to my senses, asked about prison programs, mentioned family. Then near the bottom of the second page he wrote, "Man, I still think about how crazy that night was, the way everything went sideways so fast. I remember the bag got heavier than I expected and I almost slipped on that wet floor by the freezers." He wrote it like a shared memory, like we had both been there. But the detail about the wet floor by the freezers was never in any police report, never mentioned at trial, never in any news article about the robbery. The only person who could know that specific detail was someone who had physically stood on that floor during the crime. Marcus had written a confession in his own handwriting and mailed it directly to a prison. Mr. Castillo said that in 20 years of appeals work he had seen cases cracked open by less. The letter was now photographed, dated, and filed. Marcus had handed us the thread we needed without anyone asking him to. Mr. Castillo filed a supplemental motion attaching Marcus's letter and requesting access to the full physical evidence inventory. The materials were in a county facility across the state. Getting access required approvals, a chain of custody review, and a supervising judge's authorization. It took months, but eventually Mr. Castillo and an independent examiner were granted access to the storage locker where my case materials had sat since the trial. The original evidence list included the gun, the duffel bag, clothing from my car, the submitted flash drive, and photographs. When the examiner went item by item through the box, most things were accounted for, but the duffel bag was gone. The item most directly linked to the robbery, the bag Marcus had clutched when he jumped into my car, likely holding trace evidence connecting it to him, had vanished from a sealed box in a secured facility. The log showed it checked in. No record of it being checked out, just gone. The only people with access to that kind of vault were law enforcement personnel with proper clearance codes, one more clean line pointing back to the same two men. 3 weeks after the evidence review, I was pulled from my housing unit at 5:45 a.m. and told I was being transferred. No advance notice, no explanation beyond a transfer order signed the previous afternoon. By 8:00 a.m. I was on a transport van heading to Coldwell State Prison, 260 miles from Hargrove, 260 miles from Mr. Castillo and everyone working on my case. The transport guard riding in the back was quiet most of the trip. About an hour outside Coldwell while the other officer had headphones in, this guard leaned slightly toward me without making it obvious and said in a flat, low voice, "Somebody important wants you quiet. Just once, nothing else." I sat with those words for 200 miles thinking about the missing duffel bag, the missing footage minutes, a retired detective turned business partner, a brother who told me some things are buried for a reason. All of those forces had just moved me further from the people digging them up. But they had made one mistake. They didn't know what Mr. Castillo had already put in motion. The transfer put miles between me and my team but didn't slow them down. Mr. Castillo drove out to Coldwell twice in the first month. Sandra handled everything through mail and phone. 2 months after the transfer, Mr. Castillo called with news that shifted the weight of the entire case. A man named Thomas Webb had come forward through Second Sight. Thomas had worked as a subcontractor for Meridian Build Group for 18 months. He said one afternoon at a job site cookout, Marcus, in a loud and boastful mood, started talking about how smart he had been years ago when things could have gone badly for him. Thomas quoted him as closely as memory allowed. "My little brother took the fall and didn't even put up a real fight." Marcus had laughed saying it like a funny story about getting away with something minor. Thomas hadn't understood the meaning at the time, but months later he saw a social media post about my case and immediately connected the words to a name. He said he could not stay quiet after that. His sworn statement joined everything else in our file. The case was no longer a long shot. Mr. Castillo made a calculated move. He wanted to push Marcus into reaching out to Callaway, doing something observable. Through Second Sight's media contacts, he allowed a carefully worded item to circulate on a local criminal justice blog. The post said a previously unknown copy of the Hollies Avenue surveillance footage had surfaced and was in the possession of an unnamed advocacy group working on a wrongful conviction appeal. Unconfirmed, undenied, just a rumor with enough detail to feel credible. Mr. Castillo expected one of two reactions. Marcus would stay still and hope it faded, or he would panic and call Callaway. If Marcus called Callaway, that was exactly what we wanted. It took 2 days. According to records obtained later, Marcus placed 7 calls to Callaway's personal cell phone in a 48-hour window after that post went live. 7 calls in 2 days to a retired detective who was also his secret business partner. Panic, exactly as predicted. And neither of them knew that Calloway's phone had been under a court-ordered monitoring arrangement for the past 4 months as part of a separate investigation into evidence tampering inside the department. Detective Bryce Calloway had not retired cleanly. A separate internal probe into evidence tampering had been running quietly for over a year before my case gained traction. Several former officers were under scrutiny for manipulating case materials in exchange for payments. Calloway's name had appeared on a flagged financial record early in that probe, and his phone had been placed under a monitoring order 11 weeks before Marcus made those 7 calls. Mr. Castillo learned about the monitoring through a contact in the district attorney's office who recognized the overlap between both cases. The prosecutors running the corruption probe reached out directly once they understood the connection. They had recordings. They were willing to share the portions relevant to my case. Mr. Castillo called me at Coldwell and said he needed to read me a transcript. I sat on the edge of my bunk with the phone pressed hard against my ear. He started reading. Halfway through, I pressed my free hand flat against the wall just to feel something solid, because what he was reading confirmed everything I had believed for 8 years but had never been able to prove to anyone in a position to do something about it. The recording was from the second evening of calls. Marcus had phoned Calloway and the conversation ran 11 minutes. Most of it was Marcus talking fast, trying to gauge how real the rumor about the footage was. Calloway kept telling him to calm down. Then Marcus asked directly whether the video situation was truly settled. Marcus said, "Man, you told me the video was gone for good." A pause, then Calloway, "Relax, would you just relax? Your brother ain't getting out." Something low from Marcus, not fully captured. Then Calloway, "That chapter is closed, stop calling me like this." The call ended 2 minutes later. 11 minutes of audio, 2 sentences that confirmed everything. Marcus knew the footage had been suppressed. Calloway was the one who made it disappear. My brother had not just framed me, he had arranged for an active detective to bury the evidence that would have freed me. They went into business afterward. For 8 years both of them lived comfortably while I counted days inside a cell. My lost years were the foundation of their partnership. And now someone with real authority had finally heard exactly what they had done. Mr. Castillo filed the motion to reopen my case on a Thursday morning. 31 pages, Thomas Webb's sworn statement, the recorded call transcript, business filings linking Marcus and Calloway, Beverly Cole's account of the detective's unusual behavior, Earl Hutchins's testimony about the 2 flash drives, and Marcus's letter with the wet floor detail never made public. Every item sourced, dated, and attached. The motion landed with Judge Henrietta Morse, who had no connection to my original trial. Mr. Castillo said that mattered. A judge with no prior investment in the conviction could evaluate new evidence without needing to protect an old decision. Judge Morse reviewed the filing for 4 days. On the 5th day her clerk called. The judge was ordering a full independent audit of the county evidence vault. Every item, every log, every chain of custody record from the date of my arrest. The audit team would have unrestricted access and report directly to her chambers. Mr. Castillo called me that same afternoon. He said in 20 years of this work he had never seen a judge move that fast on an audit order. Something in that filing had convinced her it needed to be resolved immediately. The audit took 3 weeks. 4 independent examiners worked through the county vault, cross-referencing every item against every log. Most boxes were exactly what the records said. But in the 3rd week, working through a section storing older cases, the team opened a cardboard box labeled with a case number from a misdemeanor property dispute filed the same year as my arrest. The label matched a resolved case with no active legal proceedings, the kind of box that would never be randomly pulled. The audit opened it anyway. Inside, instead of misdemeanor documents, were items that didn't match the label at all. A sealed evidence bag, a small electronic device in a protective sleeve, a chain of custody slip with my case number on it folded and tucked underneath. The device was a flash drive. When examiners checked its serial number against the original intake records from the Hollies Avenue robbery, it matched the second flash drive that Earl Hutchins had watched an officer place into an evidence bag on the night my life changed. Someone had hidden it in a mislabeled box and left it in that vault for 8 years, betting it would never be found. The flash drive went to a forensic technician under court order. Files were intact, sealed in a protective sleeve in a temperature-regulated vault for 8 years without degradation. The technician recovered 4 video files matching all 4 camera angles at the Hollies Avenue store. 3 matched what was submitted at trial. The 4th did not. It was the exterior alley camera, the angle the prosecution claimed produced no usable footage. The footage was clear. A dark hooded figure running from the store's back exit into the alley. About 30 feet in, the figure glanced back over his shoulder, instinctive, the kind of look you take when running from something. The hoodie shifted back slightly. The exterior light above the alley door caught his face for less than 2 seconds. 2 seconds was enough. The technician enhanced those frames into still images. Mr. Castillo drove to Coldwell to show me himself rather than describe it over the phone. He laid the prints on the table between us and said nothing. He just let me look. The face looking back over that shoulder was Marcus, my brother, running from the store he robbed while I sat in a car in that parking lot waiting to drive him home. The new hearing was held in Judge Morse's courtroom 6 weeks after the flash drive was recovered. Marcus attended with his attorney, subpoenaed but not yet arrested. He sat across the aisle looking composed, and I found myself almost respecting it, because holding that kind of composure under that kind of pressure takes years of practice, and Marcus had been practicing since the night he jumped into my backseat. Prosecutor pressed play on the footage. The courtroom was quiet as the video ran, the figure, the alley, the glance back, the face. Enhanced still images were shown on a large screen visible to everyone. Judge Morse studied them from the bench. Then Marcus stood up without waiting to be recognized by the judge. He didn't consult his attorney. He just stood and said loudly, real desperation cracking through the composure for the first time, that the footage was fake, manipulated, altered to destroy him. His attorney pulled him back into the seat. But every person in that courtroom had just watched a man leap to his feet and call footage fake before anyone gave him reason to question it. That reaction told the room everything it needed to know. After a brief recess, the prosecutor moved to the second phase. He told the court that in addition to the recovered footage, the state had obtained phone recordings from a separate law enforcement monitoring operation directly relevant to the case. Then he played the full 11-minute call between Marcus and Calloway, every word. Marcus saying the video was supposed to be gone for good. Calloway telling him to relax because his brother wasn't getting out. The room was still for all 11 minutes. I watched faces change as people followed the audio. The exact moment understanding arrived, when they realized this wasn't a procedural dispute but two men discussing a buried crime like a routine task. Bryce Calloway was in the courtroom, subpoenaed and seated near the back with his own attorney. When the recording ended, 2 U.S. Marshals moved toward his row. Calloway stood. I believe he intended to walk out. He reached the aisle. They reached him there. He was placed in handcuffs and arrested at the courtroom door while Judge Morse watched from the bench without speaking. Judge Morse issued her ruling the following morning. She vacated my conviction entirely, not a reduced sentence, not a conditional release. A full vacation based on prosecutorial misconduct, evidence suppression, and newly discovered material evidence that undermined the factual basis of the original verdict. The ruling was 14 pages. Mr. Castillo read the key sections over the phone, and his voice wasn't entirely steady by the end. Arrest warrants were issued for both Marcus and Calloway, who was already in custody on corruption charges but now faced additional counts tied directly to my case. Processing my release took 2 days. I had been inside 8 years, 1 month, and 11 days. I went in at 24 and was coming out at 32. Cleared record 14-page ruling stating plainly that the system had failed me and the responsible parties had been identified. Mr. Castillo told me to be ready early Friday morning. He said when those gates opened, people would be waiting outside. He was right about that. I walked out of Coldwell State Prison on a Friday at 7:14 in the morning. The air hit me first, open and cool in a way prison air never manages to be. Mr. Castillo was there. Sandra was there. Earl Hutchins had made the full drive out, which I had not expected and which meant more than I could put into words standing there. My mother was a few feet back from everyone, and when she saw me come through that gate, she covered her mouth with both hands and went completely still. I hugged her first and held on a long time, then I looked at the open sky and just breathed. Mr. Castillo handed me a folder, the ruling, the warrant documentation, everything needed to start rebuilding. As we walked toward the parking lot, a county vehicle pulled in from the opposite direction. 2 officers got out and opened the back door. Marcus stepped out in handcuffs, being escorted into the same building I had just walked free from. He saw me. He stopped for a second and looked at me with something in his face, maybe shame, maybe a question. I shook my head slowly. I said, "Man, you should have told the truth the first time." Then I turned and walked to the car.